oriented designing, and we had last time we had discussed the case for object oriented designing, and then we had tried to understand the importance of object oriented designing over the traditional methods. It is always important to remember, and I always reinforce this, before we learn something new, we should always try to trace back from where it is coming from, because that always gives us a perspective of why a new technique is important and meaningful and relevant. So, hopefully, by now, at least if you would have read the paper and from our introductory session on object oriented designing, by now you may have understood the importance of object oriented designing, and moving forward, it will become more clear to you as to how we achieve that. So, in the process of object oriented designing, as we had discussed last time, there are basically three steps: object analysis, object designing, and then you implement the object. So, implementation basically means that you give a structure to your uh, design structure using some coding language, which is obviously following the paradigm of object oriented programming. So, talking about object analysis, what happens in this is that you basically identify the objects that will make up the software or the solution. So, in your projects that you are doing, start thinking of the different objects that will form a part of your solution and how they will interact with each other. So basically in object analysis, you are identifying the building blocks of the project that you are going to develop. And in lab, this will become much more clear. So basically then objects are considered as independent entities with their own local goals. However, they are interacting with other objects also through collaboration to pass a message across the objects, so that whatever the system is trying to accomplish can be done. So, in object oriented analysis, there are some points which are considered. It will be very difficult to identify the objects if the problem statement or the requirements of the project are not understood clearly. So, see, as we are moving forward, we always go back and connect to the level or the degree of understanding we have about the problem, and how exhaustive and how well formed our requirements are for the project that we are trying to develop. So, imagine it as a reverse pyramid. Every successive state or every successive phase is considerably dependent on the preceding stage. So that is why when we talk about object analysis, identification of objects, one of the prerequisite is that you have to understand the requirements of your project and write the specification of requirements of the user and the software, which you have already done in your SRS. Going through, I was going through some of the SRS that you have submitted, and so at least on the surface it is reflecting that you have understood what SRS means. So writing the specifications of requirements is also one of the things that is considered in object analysis. Then after you have identified the objects as in the entity as a whole, you have to identify its attributes, and then later on you will be identifying its services or the functions that it is performing. And then basically you will determine the interconnections among objects in terms of services required and the services rendered. So basically how the message passing is happening between the different objects. So if you look at it diagrammatically, these are the basic things that are performed during the object oriented analysis. Now don't get caught up in the methodology or the technical things. Just try to understand intuitively what is happening when we talk about object oriented analysis. Basically, you know some aim of the project and you have identified the aim of the project. Based on your understanding of the problem, you decide the requirements. So basically requirements are the functions that the system is supposed to perform for fulfilling of the overall functionality of the product that you are making. Once you have decided the requirements, then you decide the objects which will fulfill those requirements. And after that, you identify the services across the objects and decide how they are collaborating with each other. And there is no sequence in this particular space. So this can happen parallelly also, sequentially also, based on how clearly you identify the objects and then basically the services and collaborations. Once this basic structure is ready, then you can move on to the design stage. So naturally, a question arises. So, okay, you told us to identify objects, but how do we identify objects related to our project? So again, this demands that you are immersed in the project or the product that you are trying to make. But however, there are certain criteria that can be used to identify objects in the system. So since object is a entity that is providing some service to the system, so it must perform some service in the system, and you should be able to assign specific responsibilities to various objects in the system. So it should serve some functionality in the overall system. It should be important to the overall functioning of the system. If it's not, then you would not necessarily consider it an object. Then it must have attributes whose values are examined, often manipulated, and used in performing the services assigned to it. So there can be several relevant attributes. And thirdly, the object must be essential for the functioning of the system. So these are the few criteria that you can use to identify the objects. But do not always go by the rule book. Always keep your intuition along with you whenever you try to develop something. And by this time, I'm sure that since you have worked on use case diagrams and context diagrams and first level DFDs, we will be exploring in detail. So by this time, hopefully you will have some inkling on how to identify the objects. So basically, how can you identify objects? So generally, when we talk about classes or objects, they can come from these sources that you can see on your screens. So they can be either tangible things, for example, car or certain kind of data, some sensors that you are using to gather data from your product and then analyzing it. If you are using some survey data, so that could become an object, then a user chat history and things like that. Other examples in which the objects can be identified is that they can play some roles in your system. So based on that, you can identify the object. So in particular to your projects that you are doing, you need to identify what are the different roles, you know, that the system or the chunk of system is performing. So that can be identified as a role. So it often comes across as some engine of the system. Then certain events can also become objects, like interrupt, request, alert, and notifications. And then lastly, interactions. So how your system is interacting with the end user, that also can become the object. So let us try to understand identification of objects using an example. What do you think is this? What kind of system would it be when you look at this particular image? So what do you think it is? Anybody?
A bank.
Yeah, it's a bank. So, what name can we call it in the terms of IT or software? What kind of system it is? So, what is it managing generally? What does a bank manage? So, maybe we can call it a financial management system. Okay. So, let's say there's a financial management system. So, what do you think the objects of a financial management system can be, according to you? According to all of you, what can be the possible objects in a financial management system or class? So think about the criteria that we discussed just now. They should be essential to the functioning of the system. They should have certain kind of attributes. You should be able to. So think about the previous thing. They can be roles, they can be interactions, they can be events. So when you think about this, what can be the objects in a financial management system? Anyone? So is it too difficult to identify? All right. So let's say these can be some of the objects in a financial management system. So let's say investment, account, transaction, and customer. So what is happening is that after you have identified these objects, you can identify their general and specific properties. So when you talk about investments, then there can be multiple types of investments, like real estate investment, investment in shares. There can be multiple types of customers based on who is interacting with your financial management system. So obviously the functionality provided to different customers by this financial management system is different. The rules and protocols are different. Then there are different types of accounts like savings account, money market, checking account, and CDs. So, but all these will have a common feature, but some of them will have specific feature. So, and all these objects are sort of communicating with each other to fulfill the functions that a financial management system is expected to perform. I understand identification of objects can be challenging, but the advantage that you have is you have been working on certain projects before and you are working in teams. So when you discuss among your team members and start thinking about object identification in your system, because in our next session of labs, unfortunately we lost this week's lab. So, but in our next sessions of lab, we will be working around these things, and for that we need to know the objects in the system. So after you have identified the objects, you need to determine the object responsibilities. Objects without responsibilities and services will not fulfill the functions of your system. So basically you have to provide them operations that they will carry out on their own to fulfill uh, some function in the pipeline of functions to provide the overall functionality or the overall meaning to the product that you are making. So basically, communication can be done through transfer of messages across the objects. Maybe one message is triggered by some object, it is received by other object, and some processing is done, and the message is relayed to another object, which again is passed on to some other object. So, object responsibilities will only be also clear when we understand the problem we are solving and keep talking to the stakeholders and clients to get at least the object identification and responsibilities clear. First round of meetings with all the groups is over. For the next round, I'm leaving absolutely to all of you. So those groups who want to discuss how to take things forward, they can definitely write to me, and we start need to think about the object oriented designing. So basically, what happens in designing is that there are different ways to design a software. So there are different system views. Based on these views, you can have a different way to design this software. So before we move on to object modeling, understanding this is also important. So there's something called as users view, structural view, behavioral view, and implementation view. So in users view, what you are basically doing is defining the functionalities made available by the system to its users. So how the user will perceive the system is doing. So its internal structure, dynamic behavioral system components, and the implementation is not visible, but just on the surface level, what the system is expected to do. So what do you think could be an example of a user's view diagram to uh, explain what the system is doing? Not the internal, but the at least on the surface level, what example would fit in for the user's view? So, what about use case diagram? Do you think use case diagram fits in the user's view? So, am I audible? Is the question clear? So, use case diagram generally can be considered as a user's view because on the upper level it is telling, or it can also be used by system developers. But when you show it to the user can basically try to at least have some idea of what the system is trying to do. In structural view, if we define the kinds of objects which are important to the understanding of working of the system and its implementation. So it's a level deeper from the user's view, and you're trying to actually understand the building blocks, the structure that will make up your entire system. And definitely it demands capturing the relationship among classes. In behavioral view, it is more of a dynamic view of the system. So how your system is behaving with triggers and actions. So it's basically a part of a dynamic view of your system. And lastly, in implementation view, you capture the important components of the system and its dependencies. So an advanced class diagram could qualify as a implementation view. So now that you know that there are different ways to design a software based on the view that is expected, why do you think it is important to understand or important to look at different views of a particular system before you go on to implementation stage? So what is the importance of trying to look at a system design from multiple views? What do you think? Any guesses? So think of who will be the viewers of these kind of views. So the reason that we have numerous views of the system, so it's generally good to have multiple views of the system because a system can have different stakeholders, so people who have interest in different aspects of the system. But that is about the stakeholders. Even as a developer, when you try to look at your system from different views, uh, you can understand much better what your system is exactly doing, and that will automatically get reflected when you are trying to implement your solution. So for example, when we consider case of washing machine, so I'll be explaining how different views of a system with respect to a washing machine example. So if you're designing a washing machine's motor, you might have one view of the system, but when you're writing the operating instructions, you might have another. And in third case, if you're designing the machine's overall shape, you see the different, if you just want to wash the clothes, so you see the different in a very, you see the system in a very different manner. So the idea is that to have a 360-degree view of the system, sometimes you might to look or design different views of the system, because obviously one view is not sufficient. And after system designing, because the implementation and coding aspect is quickly coming up, so it is advisable to understand and able to view the system from multiple views, so that uh, it's sort of a good warm up before you go on to the implementation stage. So that is why, as a developer, especially when you're trying to design small scale products, it may be easy, but when we talk about complex projects, it's not always easy and feasible. But yes, team always comes up to assist the process. The second reason is that when you want to present your proposed product to the stakeholders or to the venture capitalists, then you have to design a view in such a way that it is easier for them to understand. Normally, when an idea is proposed, business analysts uh, go to the people who are actually interested in the product, and during their presentations they just show the user's view. So they might show some snapshot or screenshots of a mobile app and how the system is proceeding. The code may not have been developed, but if they're able to show this view to the people, the stakeholders and the clients, then it is easier to get the idea and the feedback about that. So think of views as a language that you use to communicate your idea to different set of people or different stakeholders who are associated with the product that you are making. I hope I'm audible. Any heads up for that? Are you understanding what I'm trying to explain here?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Uh, Lecturing online can be a bit tough sometimes. It's like I'm talking to myself. So, all right. So talking about we have understood hopefully the importance of different views of the system, and through use case also you are trying to understand your system in a different way. When you try to design a context diagram, you have a different view of the system. When you're trying to identify the first level DFD and second level DFD, you have a different view of the system. But overall, I believe with every level you are able to understand on a deeper level what your system is trying to accomplish. So that is why basically you're trying to gain familiarity. The reason is that coding uh, doesn't take much time in the software development life cycle. It generally takes 10 to 15% if your system is ready. But the first level of coding I'm talking about. So, but the first level, when the development at the first level is done, and you have sort of developed a first crude version of your product, then when you go on to check it and verify it, then it can take much more time depending on the bugs and all these things that you identify. So that is why it is always advisable to spend good amount of time in understanding system design before you move on to the implementation stage. So, talking about design modeling, there are basically two types of system modeling. They can be static modeling or dynamic modeling. So, again, talking about the software design. In static modeling, as the word suggests, it basically describes the layout of data or the overall structure of the system, but is not showing what happens to various parts of the system. So, how different parts are getting manipulated, how they are getting changed. So, that is not exactly shown in the static modeling because that's not its purpose. In static modeling, you decide what the logical or physical parts of the system should be and how they should be connected to each other. So think of a class diagram. You're identifying the you're analyzing them, you're identifying their attributes and functions, and basically you're trying to understand how they are connected structurally and logically with each other. In dynamic modeling, what happens is that you're also telling how information is flowing across the system. So basically, about deciding how the static parts should collaborate with each other to ultimately explain what the system is doing. And sometimes it also has some trigger points depending on the different types of dynamic models. One of the models is state diagram, the other is sequence diagram. So if we have to take an example for dynamic modeling, although these are much discussed later in advanced software engineering, but just to give you a brief idea of it, think of this example. So this is an example of personal loan application in bank. So you're you're trying to apply for a loan in the bank. So what you essentially would do is you apply, the system has received the application, the system then checks the application. Based on the check application function, there can be either two outcomes. Either the application can be rejected or it can be approved. When it's approved, then so basically the application has become an accepted application, and then there are certain procedures that can be performed on this particular application, and then when it's cleared, that means the loan has been paid. The other situation could be that the application has been approved, however, the applicant has refuses certain conditions that the bank has demanded for a loan to be successful. So in that case, again, the applicant has refused the application. So this is basically a state diagram. Try to think it as a finite state automata. So at every you can see that every bubble it, it shows what the system is doing, and then this arrow becomes the trigger. So basically the application object goes through several states. So these are the different states, shown in the bubbles. And the so the movement from one state to another is known as state transition. So earlier, at the first level, the system is in the state of received application, and then it transitions to checked application, wherein the application is checked based on the method of check application. So each state transition is activated by an internal event or by a message from another object. So basically, when the system has received the application and the application has been submitted, then post submit button, there will be some trigger which triggers check application function. So when that function is called, then all the details are seen, and based on that, either application is rejected or it's approved. So each arrow that you see in the state diagram will actually become a method in the application object. Okay. So in this, you can actually see, so you don't know what are the structure and the building blocks of your solution. However, you can see how information is flowing from starting point to end, and overall how the system is actually expected to perform. An automatic system is expected to perform when it comes to application of loan in the bank, and how it is arriving at the end stage. So this is an example of a dynamic modeling, although there can be much more complex dynamic modeling diagrams as well. But for this class, we will try to limit our understanding of dynamic modeling to the state diagram. Interested students can definitely explore more about dynamic modeling. Now, going forward, we need to also talk about use case modeling. Uh, and it is just a revision of what you have already done. So static modeling, dynamic modeling, you have seen one example of dynamic modeling as a state diagram. And hopefully in our next coming labs, we will also work around creating a state diagram for your projects, which will be very important, because when you try to look at, when you will have different diagrams or software design for your system, you have use case, you have DFT, you have class diagram, and you have state diagram. Then basically this is your warm up with for the implementation stage to come. A good warm up always leads to better performance in whatever you are doing. So similarly is the case with that. Just revising what we have learned about use case modeling is a kind of, again, a description of a system's behavior from a user standpoint. And it is useful for gathering system requirements from a user's point of view. So when we are designing a project, especially when we are working on a new project that we have not worked before, we are also introduced to the project as newbies. So we gradually develop our understanding step by step. So use case modeling always helps, provides that foundation based on which we can go to much more complex designing diagrams. By this time, you may have hopefully understood how to create use case diagrams and what are the different important entities in the use case diagrams, because the discussion on software design is absolutely incomplete without the use case diagrams. So just helping you recall what we had talked about use case diagrams. It's a use case diagram for university registration. Note that the actors are interacting with different use cases as shown. Similarly, this is another example for use case diagram. Now we move on to the class diagram. So class diagram is a static diagram. It provides a structural view of the system and it follows the object oriented design paradigm. So they are the basics of object oriented systems. And in our next week's lab, because this week's lab we would again focus on the TFTs. In our next week's lab, we will be taking up class diagrams. So in basically class diagrams, they help you identify what classes there are, how they interrelate and how they interact with each other. So it gives you an overview of a software system by displaying classes, attributes, the methods, operations, and their relationships between each other. It is important to note where we are going in this direction. We start from use case, we go to context, we go to level, first level DFV diagrams, and then we move to, in between, we also stop for state diagram, and then we go on to class diagram. You see, with every step in the software designing and diagrams, what you are essentially arriving at is a better and deeper understanding of the system that you are trying to develop. And things become much more complex when we go, but you don't have to fear complexity if you have understood the aim of your product and the requirements. Then it's basically a game of how you arrange the knowledge and the intuition into the class diagram. And class diagram helps construct the code for software application development. It will not be flawless because it's not possible to develop accurate code just from this class diagram because there are multiple parameters involved. But it is a very potent step towards the implementation because here you are talking not in terms of uh, general language. Here you have started to talk about your product or project in technical or object oriented language. So there are certain basics of class diagram. Obviously, so classes are there and class relationships are there. In classes, you need to identify the basic class components and their attributes and operations. In class relationships, so there are just in use case, there were different types of relationships like extend, include, and generalization. Similarly, there are relationship across classes, which are associations, generalizations, aggregations, and compositions. At this moment, I just want to ask that when we talk about software designing or system, why are we so interested in understanding the kind of relationship between use cases or classes? What do you think understanding the relationship between classes or use cases is important? Any thoughts on that?
It helps in reducing redundancy and increasing, easy to implement if you understand it how, well.
Okay. So again, implementation also comes later when. So these are different entities in your system. Why is it? Why can't we just put them as independent blocks? Why it is vital to show the relationship and identify not just the relationship but the kind of relationship? Why do you think it is vital to the later stages in the software development?
To make the software robust so that, we need to make it modular and less collateral something like, other one module should less depend, but they need to be associated clearly so that, then our idea will be clear.
Okay, right. Thank you, Tarun. So basically, when we talk about relationships, in use case diagram or in class diagram, remember by the multiple iterations that you have had of use case diagrams, now you know that which chunk of the system is dependent on another chunk of the system, how it is communicating with it, and how one particular chunk is can be extended to another chunk based on extension points and these things. Because ultimately, the objects that are essential to the working of your system, need to interact and communicate with each other. So basically, it's a giant pipeline in which these entities are associated with each other through different types of relationship to basically provide the overall functionality of the system. And that is why it is important to know the nature of relationship between different classes, and obviously the boundaries also, though which relationships are feasible between classes, which are not feasible. So all these things are important to understand because ultimately they help in the implementation aspects. And if we get the relationships wrong between the classes or the use cases, and because software designing precedes implementation, and if we have misidentified the relationship, that will get reflected in the implementation, and much later when you do the unit testing or the system testing, then it will get reflected, oh, it is not working as expected, what has gone wrong. So try to identify relationships between the classes in a manner which is clear and intuitive and easy to explain. So that is why not only putting classes, attributes, and functions, but you also need to identify uh, how they are related to each other. And then these are the kinds of relationship that exist between classes, and we will have a good look at them. So again, when we talk about classes, you can think over things in the world around you. The things that surround you have attributes and they behave in certain ways. And these behaviors can be seen as a set of operations. So these are just few of the examples, like bicycle could be a class, watch could be a class, washing machine could be a class. And again, these all these things have their own features and they have their own functions. In your project, like as I'm talking about classes and objects in this class, in the back of your mind, or after this class, uh, try to think about what could qualify as a class or as an object for my particular project. Because based on that, once you have identified the object, then you can identify its attributes and then you can identify its functions. So that is the first step. It may not always be possible to identify everything right from the start, because when you move forward, you see that okay, this functionality is not being catered by any object so far, so I need to define another object. So that is why identification is vital. Again, I'll take a example of washing machine to help you explain what we are talking about. So a class is basically a category or group of things that have the same attributes and the same behaviors. So when we talk about, so if washing machine is a class, the attributes of washing machine could be brand name, model number, serial number, and the capacity. So these are certain attributes of a washing machine. Its behaviors could be accepting clothes, accept detergent, turn on and turn off the machine. So again, when it comes to your respective projects, try to at least identify two, three classes starting in the object oriented designing, and then from that, try to expand your thinking on how different classes are required. And after that, you can go on to the attributes and behaviors. So, attributes again, for different types of machines, the values of these attributes would be different, but mostly and sometimes behaviors would be mostly common until and unless you override these functions in the classes. So generally in class diagram, this is how a class is denoted as. Sometimes there are different ways to denote the classes. Sometimes this last row is removed, but all these three rows are always there. So the first row is the title or the name of the class. Contains a class name. If it's an abstract class, it will be italic, or if you put it in parenthesis, that also shows an abstract class. Then uh, in between there is attribute names. So these are the attributes of washing machine: brand name, model name. Note how these are written. And then there are operations that a washing machine can perform or is expected to perform. So normally in class diagram, when you look at class diagram examples, these would be basic feature, and obviously the attributes can have different properties. They can be public, private, protected, and similarly applies it for the functions as well, the operations. So this is how the basic structure of a class looks like when we talk about a class diagram. So is this clear how a class is shown in a class diagram as a basic building block? Is this clear to all of you? All right, so I'll take that as affirmation. So these are some, we will be talking about basic UML class diagram notations. So basically this is how a class is denoted. Abstract class, you can put it in italics. The virtual method is also put it in italics, or you can put the name into parentheses, so that also denotes an abstract class. Note that the name comes on the top, the attributes in between, and the methods in the last. So uh, these are just few of the examples of how certain classes may be denoted in class diagram. So suppose this is a class of loan account. So these are the attributes: the type of loan account, the account name, the date on which it is released, and the loan amount. And it has some functions: renew and extend. Normally, a class should also have getter and setter functions. So when you will develop a class in your class diagram, make sure that you also have getter and setter functions, because normally they are also required. And this is another example of a member class, in which you can see that it has written not only the attributes but also the type of the attributes, like public, protected, and private. So this is another level of information. Again, it comes on um, how far you have thought on about the implementation of your system and the different properties of the classes. The another example is of an abstract class. So abstract class is generally mentioned by italics, and then abstract method is again by italics. It can be overwritten in its classes which are using this abstract class. So if you have any abstract class in your system, uh, then you can denote it like this. So just giving you certain examples of how the class is denoted in a class diagram. So when you look at this particular chunk, it is easier to understand, okay, this particular class, what is it is supposed to do, and what are its attributes. So that gives you a first level view of what that particular chunk will be expected to perform in the overall scheme of things. So there are multiple relationship between classes. We talk about one of the relationship, which is inheritance relationship. So inheritance basically is a kind of relationship. So if there is a overall classes of department, then there can be multiple departments. So there can be a surgery department. If the system is about hospital management system, then there can be a surgery department, there can be consulting department, and then there can be a dentistry department. So this is how you show the inheritance between the classes. Note that these are the classes, and these lines actually show that there is a space for attributes, there is a space for operations, and then basically all these three classes are inherit and inheriting the department. So inheritance is a kind of uh, relationship between classes. So when you draw your class diagrams, definitely there will come situations in which you try to show the inheritance between the different classes. So what we are trying to understand is that we are trying to understand the basics of class diagram, the building blocks of class diagram, and then we are moving towards how to develop an overall class diagram, which is a very important aspect of designing a software in a static manner. So this is what we are trying to understand. Then again, there are another two kinds of relationship between classes: aggregation and composition. It is very easy to get confused between these two kinds of relationships. Most of the students often get confused, and online also, if you read, you may not find much clarity. But in fact, the research community has also been quite divided on the clear differences between aggregation and composition. But it is these are very important relationships between classes, and we need to discuss that. So normally what happens is, consider this whole is a type of class, part is a type of class. So when you denote it like this, that means whole has part as a part. Okay, but their lifetimes may be different. So if whole is destroyed, part may not be destroyed, and part is destroyed, whole may not be destroyed. So this is basically an aggregation relationship. What happens in composition is that for whole to exist, part has to be there. So whole is actually made up of part, whereas in aggregation, whole contains part, but in composition, whole is made up by part. So the lifetime of part is controlled by the whole. So this is a much more stronger relationship between classes. I think it will be clear when we look at the examples. So one by one, we will discuss the association relationship and the composition relationship. So there are different ways to look at the association relationship. There are different connotations provided to association relationship. It can be categorized as uses. So basically, one class uses the another class. That is one way to explain association relationship. The other way could be the one class contains other relationship or other class. So this is the most basic type of relationship. See, association, aggregation, and composition. These are the three kinds of relationship that can happen between the classes. Association is the most generic type of relationship between two classes. When you are confused about whether to put aggregation or even composition, you can simply put in association relationship between the two classes. So, for example, a department is associated with a doctor is associated with a department. When there are no arrows between the association, you can assume it's a two directional relationship. But when it's a directional relationship, you will need to show the arrow as well. So, in this particular example, department is a class, doctor is a class. So, department uses doctor, and doctor also uses department. But the relationship, the nature of relationship is quite loose. So, it's a loose kind of association between two classes. Similarly, the passenger is associated with airplane. Airplane is associated with passenger. Student is associated with course, and course is associated with student. So this is very simple level of association between the two classes. Moving forward, I think on Wednesday we will try to discuss the aggregation and composition relationship, but today we will stop at here, and I'll just revise what we have tried to understand today. We move on. So we have understood that in object-oriented designing, it is understand to analyze the objects, design the objects, and then implement. For that, we have to identify our objects. Objects can be identified by the responsibilities that they are performing, and this is very much related to understanding the requirements of the project. And as and when that is clear, once we have identified the objects, their attributes, and their functions, at least on high level, if not deep level, then we move on to coming understanding the association between different classes. So this is a type of static modeling. We also talked about dynamic modeling, which is a state diagram of how the state of the system is changing as and when the information is percolating down the system. And we looked at how a class is described in class diagram, and then gradually we are moving towards the kind of relationship between classes. We discuss association relationship, which is the most simple kind of relationship. It's a very loose association. On Wednesday, we will look at aggregation and composition. We'll have look at multiple examples also, and that will hopefully make all of you clear about the basic building blocks of object oriented design. And then we will look at multiple class diagrams and how to create class diagrams and take forward our understanding of object oriented designing. So that is all for today. If you have any questions, I will be very happy to answer them. So hopefully you were able to understand the basics of object oriented designing, and if it's not clear, don't worry. uh, there are ample examples in which I will be explaining how to tackle object oriented designing, and it will be a very interesting activity to do going forward. Thank you so much for your time. If there are any questions, I will be very happy to answer. Thank you.